A franchise I'm very passionate about that I haven't talked about yet is Star Wars, and that leads us to the start of this video. I'm super hyped for the Ahsoka show. I love Rosario Dawson and everything that I've seen her in, and I have a huge respect for Dave Filoni, not only from his Star Wars stuff and the fact that he was kind of mentored by George Lucas, but also from back in the day in his Avatar The Last Airbender days. So with all that simping aside, if you've watched the previous videos, you know what's coming next. What if a hypothetical Dave Filoni hired me to compose this hypothetical theme for the new Ahsoka show? Now for those who aren't familiar, the composers for movies, TV shows, and video games don't just write any random set of music that they think fits the vibe of the show, and then boom, soundtrack done. It is usually a collaborative effort between the director and the composer, and sometimes studio executives when there's too many hands stirring the pot, where the composer is given a set of directions, ranging from a specific vibe or genre, and even sometimes timbre and instrumentation. The composer associated with the project is Kevin Kinner, who is also the composer for Clone Wars and The Bad Batch and other Star Wars stuff, and I'm a huge fan of him. I obviously don't want this to sound pretentious, like, oh, for some reason I would do a better job than Kevin Kinner. Hell no. I just think this would be a fun, creative, and thought process exercise that I like to engage in, and there's nothing more to it than that. So I'm pretty sure they're pretty comfortable and familiar with the sort of vibe they want the show to have. But if I'm composing a theme for Ahsoka, I don't want to just go out of my way and not have any limitations that Kevin might be having. And since I obviously don't know Dave Filoni, and I can't ask him for what sort of vibe he's looking for, I thought that a way we could use to simulate that, and I'm sorry for those of you who've seen previous videos, would be to spin the wheel. I know it might feel a bit funky, but stay with me. So to start us out, in this wheel right here, we have different levels of restrictions that we're going to have, because as we mentioned before, not every composer is the same and not every director is the same. So let's spin the wheel and see where we end up. Maybe I should have worn a cowboy hat for this to get good luck from Dave Filoni. For the past 3 videos we've gotten this option, but for those unfamiliar, this means that the director has one specific thing that he would like us to incorporate in our soundtrack, and to figure that out, we're gonna be spinning another wheel. So let us just figure out where we end up. Okay. Instrument specificity. I feel like this one is very straightforward. There's either going to be an instrument that we can't use or an instrument that we have to use. And to figure that out, we're going to digitally flip a coin. If it's tails, then there's an instrument or instrument family that we can't use. And if it's heads, well then there's an instrument that we have to use whether we want to or not. Ooh, tails. Okay, now to figure out which instrument or family of instruments that we cannot use, I just googled a list of musical instruments, and in this case we have 24, so we're gonna generate a random number between 1 and 24, and see where we end up. 8. Okay, so if we count horizontally, like 1, 2, 3, number 8 is harp. If we count vertically, we get the oboe. Now usually I would go for the chance that is the hardest one, because we are talking about Star Wars, and regardless of Kevin's amazing work, we're also talking about the work and influence of John Williams, which also means that lush orchestra sound with a lot of woodwinds. So I feel like for the sake of making things harder for myself, which I bet is going to be one of those moments where I regret leaving it a problem for future Homer, I'm not only going to get rid of the oboe, I'm going to get rid of the whole woodwinds family. It's gonna be great. I would say on the nerd spectrum level of a kid, I was probably just average. I wasn't really a die-hard fan of it. When I was a kid, the prequels were the thing that everyone talked about, so I started out with the prequels, not even knowing that they were prequels, and when I got done with the prequels and went on to the original trilogy, though at the time, the original trilogy just didn't speak to me as much, the whole vibe was different, and I remember watching the first episodes of Clone Wars that were released as a movie when it came out, but I didn't have cable TV, so I didn't watch the rest of the episodes on Cartoon Network, so it pretty much ended my connection with Star Wars over there, though everything came to change when the sequels released. I was older by then, I was already familiar with the concept of figuring out theories and stuff like that, so as that new set of movies was released between the sequels and like Rogue One and the Han Solo movie, I started getting deeper and deeper into Star Wars, and it all culminated during the pandemic when I was just at home and I was like, hey, you know what could be cool? Maybe I could finally watch the Clone Wars show. So for a couple of months on my spare time, I consumed as many Star Wars TV shows as possible, all the way from the original Clone Wars to the Dave Filoni Clone Wars, The Bad Batch, Rebels, of course The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, Andor. I became one of those people that watched every single live stream of Star Wars Celebration from there on, and throughout that journey, one character that I feel like you can't really not get attached to is Ahsoka Tano. Now I'm recording this on the afternoon, tonight I have a show, so I'm not going to be working on this for a while, but I'll come back to you with updates whenever I have something figured out. So I've been just sitting here thinking of ideas for what could be Ahsoka's theme. Previously in the movies, Obi-Wan wasn't a character with a specific theme just for himself, so when it came time to craft a theme for him for the Obi-Wan show, you can catch little glimpses of themes themes like the Force theme and others that are connected to the character of Obi-Wan, but while watching the show, you recognize that it is a different theme, not just a reharmonized or reorchestrated version of the Force theme. The Force theme is a combination of both minor chords and major chords to give you that contrast of something that you want to represent as being a spectrum, the light side of the Force, but also the dark side of the Force. In the case of Ahsoka, with her connection to the light side of the Force and the sister, as we try to imply that connection of her to the Force, I thought maybe we could try and focus more on major chords. I already programmed some like short strings to accompany me. Alright, so I didn't play it fully right, but I think you get the vibe of what I'm going for. So the Force theme, like... I'm basically doing something similar to it, but I start out going to the 6th chord, which the notes are very similar. But instead of resolving it to F sharp minor, I'm resolving it to F sharp major, to give you that contrast of major and minor chords that I mentioned before. Then a little bit of a nod to the Force theme where it goes to the 4 chord, then 5 chord. Also in the Force theme you do that little climb up of... I thought I'd do the same thing, but again changing up the chords a little bit. And then out from there, that part is a pretty sounding chord, is a major 7 chord. This part here, also a bit of a pretty sounding major 7 chord. But when we play both of them at the same time, using the sharp 9 as a bit of a color note, but also to add that little bit of spice of like, is it major, is it minor, like the minor blues. The 5 chord, that C sharp dominant chord, here I'm doing without the 5th, but again it's just a color tone. And I can't say I approve of it 100% yet, but it's something to get us started with. And the thing that I like the most about it is that in this big melody that we have, there's a lot of little tiny motifs that we can use for different situations and different circumstances across the score. So this is a bit embarrassing, because I'm pretty sure a month has gone by since I last recorded something for this video. I don't know how you guys are when it comes to this whole creative process thing. Sure, sometimes I can just be doing some regular activity, and out of nowhere an idea for a riff or a melody comes up. But if I'm trying to focus on doing something cohesive, or taking something that I just don't have completely figured out and following it up with other parts, I kind of have to be in the zone. I kind of have to dedicate myself to it with some measure of consistency for something that I can stand proud with to come out. I had to play some other shows and match it up with my regular work teaching, and all of those kind of fucked up with my sleeping schedule. So even though I was interested and somewhat excited to work on this project, it took me a while to develop some of the ideas I figured out, and then when I actually got something that I was proud of, which we'll get to later, it also took me a while to figure out a proper schedule to record this segment of the video. So it's been a while through the process, but it actually gives us some new things to talk about. Because I'm such a big John Williams and Star Wars music fan, I kind of felt a little bit of like a fake imposter syndrome doing this. Throughout it, I was like, yeah, this is cool or not, or this is not cool, or this fits the vibe, or this doesn't fit the vibe. But then I got this feeling like very often like, this doesn't sound like Star Wars. Should I go in this direction? Am I doing anything that's worth doing? But then I trusted my instincts and I was like, just keep going with it and try to do something. And then because I couldn't come back to this project because of all the shows I had to play and stuff like that, I ended up choosing to just leave it on my computer and not touch it for like a week or two. Just to make sure that I lost all the feelings that I had about it. Or if it's just that feeling of like, oh yeah, you suck at this. Or if it's indeed the feeling of like, oh no, I'm great at this. Everything I do is great. Like I mentioned in other videos, the point of these videos is just to get a small idea across, to get a little bit of a prototype, because sometimes you just need a little bit of something to get you started, something to get you going. You get to actually experiment with some new things. And after that, the horses are off to the race and you just have to figure it out and work along the way. We're back in Studio One, and usually when it comes to these sorts of videos, sometimes there are some other sketched ideas, but usually I have an idea of where to go. Now with this time, as you might be able to see, I actually had like a bunch of different ideas that I was working on and trying to figure out little segments and themes for. Overall, I ended up with this, and I kind of had to stop myself because I thought I could go further and get more melodies and more stuff, but at that point, it would end up like a 12-minute piece, which could be fun to approach another time, but for the context of this video, I think this is enough to get us an idea of what I'm thinking for, to use for the character theme of Ahsoka. But at this point, I've already rambled a little bit, but haven't yet played anything. So I'll play you the full track, and then at the end, I'll share some thoughts and feelings. Okay, so leave me your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. Like I mentioned in previous videos, I try to use the same basic preset from video to video, and then only change up the little things or add little things that are different from score to score. So if you'd like to check out what sounds and sample libraries I'm using, go check out the first video of this series where I did a theme for the Guardians of the Galaxy. But mentioning just the different sounds that are important for the score, there's not a lot of EQing going on. There's a little bit on some of the strings and horns that they pop out a little bit more. I knew there were some things I wanted to tackle. When you think of other main characters in Star Wars, the characters I think about are like Luke and Leia and even Din Djarin from the Mandalorian series. They're not just a character with one single theme over and over all the time. Yeah, you do have the Force theme getting played when some character uses a Force, or when your character does something heroic, you might use the heroic part of their themes. But if you think of some of the most iconic scenes with Luke Skywalker, for instance, in the twin sun scene in Tatooine, where he's looking beyond what life can bring him and figure out his new adventure, you get the Force theme. He's not using the Force there, but it is almost metaphorical to how you have to reach to what life can bring you. That flowy nature of life, like how the Force is in all living beings and flows through them. But then sometimes when Luke does go through his adventure, sometimes you get hints to the fanfare theme, like the main Star Wars theme that all the opening credits open with. And in some ways, that's also Luke's theme. The same thing with Leia. She has her own theme, but a big part of her development is her development with Luke and with Han. So you have themes for the relationship development between Han and Leia, and between Leia and Luke. Those characters don't just get relegated to one theme. So I wanted to do the same thing with Ahsoka here. I wanted to do a theme that clearly symbolized her connection with the Force that we mentioned before, which is this section here, and kind of like reharmonize it. She's interpreting the Force, but in her own different way. I purposely decided to only use strings, and along with the strings, I also got this patch called Ice Caves 1. And it really is one of those patches where the more you hold on to a note, the more crazy it gets, which I didn't use too much up in here because I feel like it's more of an atmosphere tints thing than like an actual like join with the orchestra thing, but I still thought it sounded nice. It's only hitting like the big important chords if I isolate it. Slower stabs. If I play the notes for too long, it can go a little bit crazy. And because I wanted this theme to be like very organic, very mellow, to represent feelings of all the things that she went through the Clone Wars, and the fact that she always feels like she leaves someone behind and she's not there for the people she cares about, which ends up leaving her feeling like maybe she's a reason why the Empire took over and Anakin fell to the dark side. There's that beautiful scene in Rebels. She figures out that, yeah, Vader is indeed Anakin, and she's like, I won't leave you this time, because there are good moments in there. There are moments of hope in here, but they're always get brought down. With everything that Ahsoka went through, I also wanted like some of the themes to have a little bit of an extra darkness to it. That little dance of going from one chord down, now. It has a little bit of like a stressing quality. Kind of leaves you in like a little bit of a spiral, like when sometimes you're not feeling too good, like you're anxious in a dark spot. You kind of like just dwell on your feeling, consuming you from within. And because our restriction was to not use woodwind instruments, I kind of wanted to get some sort of sound or instrument that would get us in that vein, would sound somewhat similar, but I also just didn't want to go to a synth library and choose some like synth flutey patch or something like that. I wanted to get something different that would get us within that realm. And I found this patch on the Omnisphere called Bode Pills. If you think of like some flute-like instrument and you play it very quiet with a lot of breath, you kind of get a similar vibe with this. And I also enjoyed that grainy sound, which could be interesting in this like samurai-inspired show that is Ahsoka. Almost like this lone wolf, rogue samurai warrior that is tired of battling and doing all of these things, is just dragging his blades across the battlefield. Kind of gave me that vibes, which I thought could be interesting to add. It's the one time where I use like these more tremolo strings to add a little bit of extra tension. Mixed with the ice caves. Ahsoka is a very strong character, but in other ways, she kind of is tired of fighting. Like how sometimes it doesn't matter that you're doing the right thing and you're doing it for the right reasons. Many of the times, you want to chill for a little bit, actually be happy for a while, but then you might end up feeling like you just haven't done enough. So I wanted to emphasize that feeling, which you can hear in this first section. This theme is basically this theme over here, but it keeps having some modulations and some key changes. Lines goes up, but then it ends up coming down. Not done with the things you need to do yet. I figured out this little phrase here, which comes a little bit out of nowhere. And I was like, huh, that kind of sounds neat. So I used it later on in this section with with the pizzicato strings. And it's used to do the little build-up. Sometimes it's small little bits like this that we can use across the show to signify different things that later on be really meaningful to the way that you score and tell a narrative and the story through that score. That little leitmotif is also used in the big fanfare-ish, more hyped theme. Sometimes the chords change, so we accommodate slightly with different notes. Most of the time, you even kind of get this feeling of like, whatever goes on, there's always that little bit in the background. There's always that little bit that stays the same and consistent throughout the piece. I changed the brass and horn sounds so that I have like a little bit less dynamics, so that they sound a bit more breathy. I like the fourth theme. The French horns end up being played very lightly with a high dynamic range and this big fanfare bit. The staccato strings also do something different than the main melody. Different melodies working together that you can use in different ways. The piano is doing an amalgam of all the different things here. There are some things that are kind of like unplayable by a single musician. I kind of like to use the piano as like a basis. Like if everything goes wrong and like suddenly the orchestra stops playing, the piano always has the general rundown of the theme. I got this patch called Dream Piano D50. It kind of has like the more you know vibes, which isn't really a Star Wars thing. But since we are already using a lot of orchestral sounds, which by themselves have a lot of Star Wars vibes, we're already using these other sounds and instruments and sample libraries that aren't exactly Star Wars traditional, but are being used in a way that kind of works. I thought that maybe one thing that we could do to give it a bit of a different vibe, because yeah, this is Star Wars, this is Ahsoka, trained by Anakin and Obi-Wan and Yoda, went through the Clone Wars, went through Order 66 and all of those things. So as much as she is a new character, she is as much Star Wars as it gets, but she's also a little bit special and different. And I also thought that this like very atmospheric vibe of the synthy piano matched with the fact that she is connected with the sister character. I suspect that they might, but I don't like legitimately know if they're going to focus on it during the show. I think that having access to little sounds like this might actually be fun. So unlike other projects, I started with this one feeling very hyped, feeling very excited to work on it. And then when I got the restriction of the woodwinds, I was kind of like, yeah, this is gonna be hard. And then I started figuring out ideas and I was like, this kind of works, but also none of the ideas I'm getting are really cool. Okay, they kind of all suck. I worked on it. I got here after all these ruined prototypes and I was left with this. I'm proud of how this sounds, and like some other projects, I'm not exactly sure. Even if I was like completely proud and happy with this, I could always like show it to the director, in this case Dave Filoni, and he would be like, cool, that's not the vibe I'm looking for. Which, hey, fair enough, he's the boss. And I think that if I were to hypothetically score any Ahsoka show, I think there are some cool themes in here that could really benefit some scenes. I'm trying not to make these videos huge, so I cut up a little bit of extra information that I can always address like in the comment section below, or if you guys have any questions or something, send me a DM on Instagram. Tell me what you think, tell me what you thought, give me suggestions for other videos that you'd like me to do, not only different themes for characters in movies or TV shows coming out and even video games, but even if you have other suggestions for other types of videos that you'd like me to do. I really appreciate all of you guys who support these videos, and I'm working so that I can upload more frequently, so subscribe and turn on all the notifications for all of those new videos, because I think some of them are going to be really exciting. If you stayed this far, thank you so very much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, cheers!